What's up everyone, my name is Rosendo, welcome back to my channel. We are back from another video, and today we are finally breaking down Atomos. Now, this is my second time recording this video. I haven't had to do that in a long time, by the way, but it's no secret that my mic has been acting up recently. I think I fixed it. It was weird because the clicking got really bad. I have no clue why. Then I was having some other clicking issues. I have no clue why. Last time I recorded this, it was actually pretty bad, and I thought, whatever, I'll just upload it, but I did not like it. So we are back, second time running through this video. I'm actually glad I did, because the first time I knew my mic was acting up, so I don't think I gave it kind of my 100% today. Hopefully I will. Although when I repeat myself, I tend to kind of be a little bit more tired of it, but we'll see. In any case, we are back with the track breakdown. Atomos came out a long time ago at this point. It's mid-November, or yeah, it's mid-November. You guys are gonna get this video in a week from now, so it's been a while, and like, there's some nice backstory behind Atomos. Again, I already explained all this, but I'll have to do it again because obviously you guys didn't see the first video. The good news is, hopefully now I can make this one a little bit more direct and less a little bit shorter and a little bit more concise, although I guarantee that's probably not going to happen anyways. I ended up kind of talking longer about the track than I did breaking it down last time I took this, but we'll try again today. But yep, back with the track breakdown, back with Atomos. Track reviews are just on pause for now because I want to make sure I do this. I have another I know what video I'm doing next, and I'll probably go back to track reviews. Maybe while experimenting with a few things, we'll see, who knows. But yes, today we have a track breakdown again. It's been a while. We're back with this. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let's hop into FL Studio. All right, we are back in FL Studio taking a look at Atomos. Now, hopefully this will have a little bit more structure. It might actually have less structure, because now it's like, okay, I got to run through everything again, and I'll be like kind of going through a mental checklist, even though I have no clue what I recorded last time. But I think I'll be a little bit, I'm going to try to be more concise, so I'm going to be trying to go a little bit faster. One last time I just kind of hit record and I was like, all right, back to the track breakdown thing that we haven't done in a while. Speaking of things we haven't done in a while, Atomos, we are looking at 11. I'm going to add in post what the actual time was, because I know this was not an 11-hour track. It's actually shorter. I think this is like an 8-hour track, because this is obviously I added an extra hour recording the last video and tweaking. I'd spent a bunch of time tweaking the mic and things like that. Let's call this an 8-hour track. We have Atomos, an 8-hour track, my fastest track up to this point, and there's a very good reason for that, which we will talk about. We are looking at about 70, a little bit more than I thought, 73 mixer tracks. Of course, most of these are FX right here. And then we have the drums, since a lot of drums. We'll definitely go over the drums. And we have all this right here. This is the Atomos project file, as you can see. So, Atomos, why did I make this track? Why did I call it Atomos? This is, again, I talked about this already, but I'm starting from scratch. This is an interesting track because there's really not a lot of kind of intention, even though there is. There's not a lot of kind of backstory about why I made this track, and all these super crazy things that I talk about a lot in things like my Expression EP. But there's such a rich kind of backstory behind this track that it's going to take me a long time to explain, and B, I want to explain it because there's so much behind Atomos that it's such a straightforward track, and it's interesting for that reason. I'm going to talk about why this track has certain characteristics that make it so different from all of my other tracks. But the interesting thing is that it's not a very complex track. I didn't make it complex. It was meant to be simple. It's meant to have a few interesting characteristics, but there's so much of backstory behind it that I really, really do want to share, because even though this is an 8-hour track, my fastest track to date, there's so much, and that goes into kind of why the track is the way it is. There's so much backstory behind this track that we got to share it starting now. All right, so let's start with the most important thing. Thing number one. Do any of you recognize this track? Probably not, right? Because I get like 2 views on my YouTube videos. This track was actually made when did I make this track? About a year ago, actually. This track was a part of a YouTube video I made about a year ago, where I tried to make a track in 1 hour. That is Atomos. This is my 1-hour challenge track. If you haven't seen that video, actually, I pretty much challenged myself to make a track in 1 hour. I start with this sample, and I build most of this track. It's not quite touched up, but most of this track, the idea and the arrangement behind the track, in 1 hour. This is my 1-hour challenge track. And in that video, I said, maybe I'll do something with it. Maybe I won't. Who knows? Maybe I'll release it. And this is actually why I did end up releasing it. And I'll talk about why I did in a second. But yes, this is my 1 hour challenge track. Now, before the actual breakdown, I'm going to include the clip of this track playing because I don't want people to go back to that, have to go back to that, find that video and then come back to here just to finish watching it if you want to hear what the original sounded like. So I'll include that right before the actual breakdown begins. But yes, I made this track in 1 hour. I arranged the track in 1 hour, I should say, and then I kind of touched up the rest of it. So again, for an 8-hour track, I've talked about how I love arranging. The whole idea was essentially made and finished in 1 hour, and it took me 7 hours to do the other stuff, which makes sense. But that's definitely the first thing I wanted to mention, is that this was one of those tracks that's how this track started. That's where this idea came from, and that's how I and then I'll talk about how I ended up here now breaking this track down. All right, so moving on. Why did I make this track? Why is this track important to me? It's actually not really important to me. I don't really hold this track in a special place in my heart like I do with my other tracks, but I'm gonna tell you guys why I don't want to. I had no intention to make this track kind of special or anything, because it all has to do with this year. It is 2025. I probably started working around this track in the summer, and well, let's talk about my discography first. So 2025 discography. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm not really too satisfied with my discography for this year. I'm actually quite disappointed. Now, part of it is disappointment in myself, but not really. I'm disappointed in how it ended up, but not because I disappointed myself, but more because I just couldn't come up with anything good. I wasn't all that creative this year. What ended up happening? All right, so let's talk about my 2025 discography. We kicked the year off with Understanding. We then have Slow VIP. We then have the One Way or Another remix. We have Night. We have Greenlight remix. And now we have Now we have Atomos. And I actually have one more track that's coming out but actually I already submitted it for distribution. It's coming out near the end of mid to late December, closer to mid-December. Now, where am I going with this? I'm going here. I'm not really too satisfied with my 2025 discography. I think it could have been, I don't think it's all that good. I'll be honest. And well, what ended up happening? Why do I not like my discography so much? Why do I not think it holds up to last year? I really like last year's discography. 2024, I kind of peaked, I'm not going to lie. 2025, it's just not, I'm not really too proud of it. Why? Now, around the summer or so, and actually kind of all year almost, I was actually in a pretty big writing block. I was actually in a pretty creative rut, and I wasn't really doing much work that I was proud of, that I really felt accomplished for. Let's talk about my tracks. Understanding was kind of made mostly in the end of, I think Understanding was released in January, maybe February. So Understanding was made mostly in the end of 2024. After I just finished up my Expression EP, I planned on taking a short break. I think the break ended up being like a week or two. But Understanding was made most around that time. But that's not the point. The point is this. The point is we kicked the year off with Understanding, a track that I think is very mediocre. I mean, I look back on it and I just don't think it's my best work. I don't think it's horrible. If I'm being tough on myself, maybe. I just don't think it's very good. That's not the point. Again, the point is Understanding, okay, medium track. It's not really that artistic melodic sound that I strive to be, but it was a track that I, was a part of me. So you had Understanding. You had Slow VIP, which if you saw the breakdown, you guys know that I finished most of it a lot earlier. And Slow was also just meant to be a fun track. It was meant to be taken unserious. It was a mid-tempo bass track, and it was a VIP of something I had already made. So I didn't really feel all accomplished with that. My One Way or Another remix was a drum and bass track, another thing meant to be fun, another thing that I'm not satisfied with. I don't think it came out too good. And then you move on, and then you have Night in the summer, which if you saw that breakdown, you guys know Night is one of the first tracks I made. I barely touched it. It was mostly done, and I made it a long time ago. So you had Night. And then from there, kind of, you move on to some better things. You have the Greenlight remix. But the point is, for the first half of the year, well, first of all, I had all those tracks planned out. I'm the type of person that likes to plan out my release schedule and think at the beginning of the year, okay, I know exactly what I need to do. And it's funny because I was watching one of my videos. I was rewatching one of my YouTube videos. I think it was the One Way or Another remix where I said I have no clue what tracks I'm uploading next. And that was true. At the beginning of the year, I had all my tracks planned out for the year. And then around the time I did the One Way or Another remix, I was in a rut. I wasn't really doing much I was proud of. I wasn't really feeling like I was accomplishing anything, and I kind of threw that schedule out the window, and I had no clue what to work on. The point is this. The point is the first half of the year, I was working on tracks that weren't all that creative, weren't all that inspiring, or tracks that were frankly mostly already finished, and I wasn't being all that creative, and it just put me in this weird spot where I was in such a creative rut. I felt like I wasn't accomplishing anything. I felt like I wasn't creating anything, and I really just didn't feel like myself. So all throughout the summer, all throughout this time, I'm just making music, and I'm working on tracks that I'd already started, already made, already decided I was going to release, and I just felt like I wasn't accomplishing anything. I was definitely in such a big writing block. And, it felt like I really didn't do much for my discography this year. Greenlight kind of changed that a little bit, but the reason I don't really consider Greenlight is because it's not an official release. I would love for it to be an official release, and then I could say I actually accomplished a track I liked in the first half of the year, even though that was kind of in August. I think it came out in August. So but the point is, it's not an official release. It was a remix, and I also had fun with it. And it's also not too emotional, too creative, and super narrationally intentional like I like my tracks to be. But again, the fact that it's not an official release, it's more like, okay, you have another remix. You have 2 remixes, 3 tracks that I kind of like or kind of started earlier and didn't really do much with. So the point is, I didn't really do much for my discography, and I was in such a big rut that time. Now, how did this track change that? Well, it was around the summer. It was maybe closing in on the fall. I can't quite remember. And I just told myself, I need to snap myself out of this rut. I need to kind of go back to being the producer self I was. And I just need something to kind of get me out of this. Oh, by the way, I should mention that. And then I had a trance track that I wanted to do in September that I spent a lot of time on that I just don't think is quite there yet. I want it to be really, really touched up. So I spent a lot of time on that, and I didn't release it. So again, it just didn't feel like I accomplished much that year. So the point is, it's now at midsummer, end of summer, I think, early fall or something. And I tell myself, I need something to kind of snap me out of it. So I started thinking about, what if I just took this 1 hour challenge track and just said, you know what? Let me just commit to this and just forget about it. Stop trying to overthink everything. Stop trying to, be so organized and so fixed and so rigid and trying to do all these things. Why don't I just take that 1 hour challenge track, go into it and turn it into something and just snap myself out of it? So that's a thought that was already in my head. And then I was, again, in the end of the summer, I think, I was at a DJ event, and I was talking to this DJ I know. And at these DJ events, I find that I'm pretty much almost the only producer there. A lot of DJs there dabble. They kind of dabble in production, and a lot of DJs in general kind of know they're supposed to be producing, and they kind of do these things like, I should make a track. I should work on some tracks or something. But I'm like a producer. I started with, my goal was always to be a producer. I'm a producer among DJs. But the point is, I was, talking to this DJ friend I know, and he was, we talk about production things, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to dabble in production and all this stuff. And then, he's talking about, oh yeah, watching, production videos and things like that. And we give each other advice and go back and forth. And he said this one thing that I'm going to come back to. But before he mentioned that, I want to clarify that I've always thought of myself as being like an overthinker and someone who tries so hard with their music, when there are people out there that are just kind of hopping into their DAW, making a track, throwing just some samples in there and being like, hey, it's pretty good. Awesome, let's upload it. And I always felt like I was working so hard and kind of almost to some extent not measuring up, and also working so hard for something that I think could be better and not really accomplishing much anyways. So I'm in a creative rut. I feel like I'm not accomplishing much. I feel like everyone else is doing it way easier than I am. And I'm talking to this guy, and he says like, oh yeah, I saw this video by this one. It was a famous producer. I don't remember what producer, but he was saying something along the lines of, oh, you know what, definitely just keep producing, do all this stuff. And, once you find your sound, just stick with it. It's one of the big mistakes I see, right? Producers try to make all these other, all sorts of tracks and kind of hop around all over the place. But once you find your sound, stick with that and you kind of do what you do best and stick with your sound. And once you find it, you're set. Now, I could address that point kind of directly, but that's not what this video is about. Although I will say, I do kind of agree with that advice. It's good advice, find your sound and do what you do best. Although I do like to hop around in all sorts of genres, right? I do have my style of producing, and I like hopping around in all sorts of genres. That's who I think I am. I'm not trying to be a producer who, builds a fan base of, one genre and then starts touring the world. That's not me. I want to be an artist. I am an artist. That's who I am. So I do like to make kind of music of all genres and all different styles and throw unique characteristics in my tracks. So while I do think that's good advice, just find your sound and stick with it, I personally like to branch out. But part of it was when I heard that was me thinking, well, first of all those things of I like to branch out, and that's not a bad thing. I like that. I like to branch out. But part of it was also me thinking when I heard that, well, I already know my sound. I mean, Exposition and a lot of things on my Expression EP, those are my, like Exposition, Release, Empty and Alone, the second drop, right? Those are kind of my sounds. If I already found my sound, why am I having such a hard time making a track? I know my sound. everyone else is doing it a lot easier than I am. I'm in a rut, but why am I having such a hard time if I already found my sound? So that's when I kind of actually decided to commit to Atomos and say, okay, you know what? I have this track. I already thought about working it. Let me commit to it. I know my sound. Why overcomplicate things? Let me finish this track. Let me work on it. And that's when I started kind of working on this track and finishing it. So that's Atomos. Atomos is the track that kind of forced me to just go into my DAW and just do what I do best and follow my sound and break me out of the rut. So what's unique about this track? What are its characteristics? What's so different about it? And kind of why did I make it this way? Now, I'm going to explain two things about this track that I think are very, very important that you guys can gather before me even saying anything. So before I even start talking about this, I want you guys to think about two very unique characteristics about this track. To me, they're kind of like groundbreaking, not revolutionary, but to me, they're absolutely a complete 180 for me. So if you guys can identify two very, very, in my eyes, extremely unique things about this track before I break them down, go ahead and think about them, because to me, there are two absolutely crazy things that I did that I just cannot believe I would do in a million years that you guys can already pick up on without even me having to explain it. So think about it for a second, but I'm about to explain what they are. So why is this track so interesting? Why is it so unique? Why is it important? Now, Atomos was essentially made with one principle in mind, which was, like I said, I never liked that people were doing things a lot easier than I was. I always felt like I was overcomplicating things. And now I know I like that aspect of my production. But let's take this track for a second, which is I always felt like I was overcomplicating things. I always felt like I was working too hard. I always felt like things were harder than they needed to be. And I never felt like I was really just I always felt like I was overthinking. I was never the impulsive type. I am not the impulsive type. Or I'm not the type of person to just, take a sample, open up my DAW and just be like, hey, throw stuff in there, make a track and upload it and let's go. So when I'm in this creative rut and when I'm thinking, okay, I need to break myself out of it, my strategy to do that was to work on Atomos and just stop thinking, just stop overcomplicating things, take what I already had and just develop it, touch it up and upload it and just do it. Be like, hey, I made this track in an hour. This stuff can come out of me naturally, commit to it and go for it. Which is why this track took me, I think, like 8 hours. It was a super, super fast track. No overthinking, committing to everything, just going for it and kind of just putting myself into a DAW and just doing whatever comes naturally. Now, with that in mind, because I wanted to make this a more impulsive track, a more straightforward, direct track, nothing too complex, this is the first thing that's very unique about this track is insanely fast. This track is just barely over 3 minutes, which is absolutely ridiculous for me. I've said before I love long tracks and I love making long tracks, and I don't think short tracks really have too much of an edge. The fact that this is barely over 3 minutes is absolutely insane for me. And not only that, but when you listen to it, you can tell it's a fast track. It moves very, very fast. If you listen to my discography and then Atomos comes up, the first thing that strikes you is just how fast it moves. It just kind of goes through it. It doesn't stop and it keeps going, which is completely strange for my style. But that's part of the track. Part of it is my impulsiveness being placed into my DAW without overcomplicating anything and without overthinking anything. Just saying, hey, let me just take my sound, throw it into a DAW and make a track and not make it harder than it needs to be, which is how we ended up here. Barely 3 minute track, a very fast track, and it just goes straight into it and just moves forward and delivers something super fast and super unique for my style. Now, thing number 2. This is the part where I have to explain something that has absolutely nothing to do with this track and is absolutely unimportant, and I really shouldn't explain, but I can't help myself because I'm the type of person that needs to explain absolutely everything. Let's rewind for a second. Around this time, and this is not important at all. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I'm a big reader. I like to read. I read a lot of nonfiction, things about personal development, communication, understanding people, and all sorts of things. And around this time, I was reading a book. The actual book doesn't matter. The theory doesn't matter. It's the book, it really doesn't matter. But the general idea of this book is it helps you kind of understand people's personality types. And the way this book does it is, and you can look up the book if you want, it doesn't really matter. The way the book does it is it categorizes people by 4 colors, right? It has people who it categorizes people who generally act one way as one color and people who generally act, 3 other ways as 3 other colors. The point is this: In this book, one of the colors is blue, and the people that are blue they're very analytical, very detail oriented. They're a little bit hesitant, and they kind of think of everything, think of all possible options before acting. And they're a little bit more reserved. Now, reading this book, I realized that I'm just a blue through. I'm so blue. I'm a blue through and through. I'm a true blue, and that's everything. That was essentially all my characteristics, right? Everything that I just shared right here about how I overthink, about how I like to kind of make things a little bit more complicated than they need to be, about the fact that you guys are watching this video that's presumably going to be over 30 minutes where I explain every single small little detail. That's me through and through. But the book also talks about other types of people that are a little bit more impulsive, people that don't hesitate, people that just charge straight ahead, people that like to lead, and people that like to just go for things without thinking, which this book categorizes those people as reds. Now, the thing about me as someone who hesitates a lot is you see people who kind of just go straight into things and charge without hesitating. And these people are pumping out tracks. These people are getting gigs. These people are doing all these things that to some extent I want to do. And they're just doing so without hesitating. And they're just they're impulsive, they're taking charge, and they're going straight for it. And I was never that type of person. This track was actually a way for me to kind of become that type of person and become that, that impulsive person that doesn't hesitate and just says, hey, you know what, let me take my sound, let me take what I know I can do, let me take what I know is my sound, and let me make a track without thinking, without overcomplicating things, without making things harder than it needs to be, without hesitating. And again, that's how we ended up with Atomos, which is, now we're on to the second thing, which is why, if you notice, again, to me, this is like crazy. To me, this is the craziest thing possible. The album artwork for this track is red, which I never thought I would do in a million years. And this also goes into the fact that I want you guys to realize that there's a lot more to things. There's a lot more that kind of goes into tracks other than just, throwing things in there. I always talk about the why behind things. And that extends not only to what I do in my DAW, but that extends to the artwork too. I always choose artwork that I like, that I feel like represents the track. And again, I'm such a kind of cool, calm, collected kind of person that I like, my blues and my dark colors. So the fact that the Atomos artwork is red, I think is just crazy for me. I never thought I would do something, but it displays the kind of the contrast so perfectly of this being a more impulsive and straightforward track, a short track, one that goes straight for it, is very, very fast. And I think it captures it very, very perfectly, which brings us to the last point, which is, why did I name this track Atomos? I talked about I didn't talk about why I made it, because I made it because I wanted to break it out of my rut. But why did I name this track Atomos? Why did I name it Atomos? It really just has to do with, as you can see the album cover, and the whole idea I had about this track, and especially after that conversation I had with that DJ person about, finding your sound and just sticking with it, and this whole idea of just listening to your instinct and just doing whatever you feel is right without overthinking it. The idea of this track was kind of based off of the Atom, and thinking that, why overcomplicate music writing? And when I'm in a rut, when I'm in a writer's block, why overcomplicate things? Why not just stick with kind of the foundations of things? Do what you do best. Do what's originally kind of inside you. Be the person who you already are. Don't change things. Stick with that foundation, that building block, and just go for it. Don't overthink. Just, hey, I like super sauce. Let's throw in some super sauce. Let's forget about the progression. Just make a track with some drops. You already have the idea. The idea came out of you pretty quickly. Just roll with it. Just stick kind of with the building block of who you are as a producer, and don't overcomplicate things. Just stick with your foundation and make a track. It's a little bit contradictory because, as I mentioned, my foundation is that a little bit more meticulous person and things like that, and I would consider that more of my root self, and if we're talking atoms and building blocks. But this is a little bit kind of in the other side of the coin, right? You could argue that way, but in this case, I'm arguing that, okay, just don't think, be impulsive, be red, and just kind of throw things into a DAW. Don't think about it. If you found your sound, you know what it is. That is your foundation. Just make a track. Just make a track. That is it. And that's how we ended up here. That's how I ended up with Atomos, the red track of my discography, the red track of this year. Will more red tracks come? Who knows? But that is where we are here finally, before we get into the breakdown. So again, just super quick recap. A huge mental block, huge writer's block in the summer, huge creative rut. And I just wanted this track to be, an impulsive track, not overthink, just stick to my foundational self and make some music in here to break myself out of this rut, giving us the fast-paced, impulsive red track that is Atomos at my core. Here we are. All right, but breakdown time. Time to actually break down this track. I mentioned that before we would break it down, I would insert what the track sounded like after the 1 hour challenge. As a reminder, I timestamp everything in the description. So if you don't care about this part, just skip it, right? It'll be in the description. You can just skip through it entirely. But I want to share what the track sounded like after 1 hour, or if you want to see the whole video before, you could. But here will be the clip of what Atomos sounded like after the 1 hour challenge. Basically, you know, no frills, just the bare bones arrangement of the track. I talked about what my goal was in the 1 hour challenge in the video, but basically the bare bones arrangement of Atomos right here. And we are back. Okay, time to actually break down this track as discussed, because the first thing we do when we start this track is we listen to the sample. Right, now this is the sample I started with in the track. We have a few other things in here. I don't remember. I think the respace was here. I don't know how many of these atmospheres were here, but essentially we are starting by setting the stage for the track. And I talked about this sample in the 1 hour challenge. Real quick recap. I chose the sample because I liked it. I chose the sample because I thought it was cool, but I didn't see myself doing anything with it. So I wanted to make a 1 hour challenge out of that, which is actually interesting because now that we made a track out of it, it just shows that, hey, I chose the sample just because I liked it. Usually I want to think about the story that you can tell with the sample and, you know, building everything in a creative. No, I chose the sample because I liked it and we just went straight for it. So it's a loop. It's almost like a song starter too, which I hesitate to grab. Although nowadays I want to grab them more because I'm realizing that, you know, there's a lot more creativity to be had. But here we are with a sample. We're here with a Reese bass. Very nice respace. I love respaces. Again, just my sound. Throw a respace in there because why not? Nice atmosphere right here. Very crucial to the track, actually. And some swells right here. More atmospheres, giving us the start of this track. Nice atmosphere, nice ARP, and we go straight into it. 4 bars later, again, this track is quick. 4 bars later, even with the reverse kick as well to really just pull you forward, and it really just feels like you go straight into it after 4 bars, which is crazy for me. Straight into it, reverse kick. Nice drums here. Crashes, reverse, a few other things. We're playing with that ARP here. We bring it down, drums go away, and we introduce a new atmosphere right here. Still playing with the ARP, and of course the sample that I use all the time that I absolutely love. Some nice vocal reverses into the buildup. Now real quick, here's that atmosphere you had earlier. But again, it just strikes you how fast you go through all of this. You go from the intro, we'll call it drums go away, build up into the drop 44 seconds, 45 seconds later. I mean, that is crazy fast for me. I have some tracks that you don't get to the drop probably 2 minutes until 2 minutes later. I can't think of anything. I mean, Understanding is a clear example, but even some of the less kind of the more obscure ones, something like Progress probably comes a little bit, actually Progress is probably quick. I mean, I'm sure there's a few out there. Even Journey Beyond probably takes forever to get to that drop. But again, that is where we are. 3 build-up samples because why not? Again, I think I started with one. I liked another one, and I just threw all of them in there because less thinking, more doing. Nice drums over here. And one of the interesting things that you get that I've been doing more, but even then I don't like to do all that much, is you get some filtered synths and filtered leads. I'm not too, there are scenarios where I like them and there are scenarios where I don't, where I think you have to be really, really careful about throwing in filtered synths and leads before a drop. I think if you do it, you need to do it carefully and with intention. Even though I find a lot of times the habit in tracks is just to throw a filtered lead in there, I think you can have a lot more storytelling if you don't do that. But in this case, it just felt right. It just felt, again, it pulls you forward very, very quickly, which is part of the track. You bring the track down, the kick and snare go away, but you still have the hi-hats into the buildup where the synths show up just to kind of, again, give you some elements of the drop. And then the leads come in right here, straight into the buildup, again, 45 seconds into the drop. Into a very standard melodic bass drop that I actually do like. A lot of drums here, a lot of basses, the nice leads here, 4 super solid layers. Why don't we break everything down? Starting with the drums, because I actually do really like the drums of this track. One's kind of loop right here, but everything else is pretty much kind of added in on my own. Really nice drums if you ask me. Some nice kind of crashes and fills over here. Hi-hat right there. Nice crashes, and of course, pretty standard fill. Throw some rides in there, some hi-hats for variance. Again, I really, really like these drums. Got some nice basses over here, a standard sub. Nice standard sub. Nice mid. And one more. With a nice kind of a high pass right here, so you really get some a little bit of movement in the bass. Solid stuff. Into your synths. Oh, very full. I like this. Probably a lot better sound design on my part as well here. Not only because my skills are a little bit better. I mean, I hadn't touched melodic music and since almost like my Expression EP. So, you know, my skills were better. So there you go. Just a big jump in quality as well, which there's one big reason why, which I'll talk about in a second. But you have a main layer. Awesome. Detune. Awesome. A little bit sharper, spacey, as you can see. A little bit more transient right there. And very nice layer. Super nice synths. OTT, a few other things. Nice little imager on there. And of course, you have your leads. Take a listen. main lead. Very nice lead layers there. Now there's one important thing that I do want to mention. At this point in my career, I like to say that there are two main things that absolutely just kind of revolutionized my mixing and my sound quality at this point. Number one, I've already talked about, is compression. Learning how to use compression really changed everything. I probably talked about that in my call breakdown, and just kind of how understanding compression and the whys and the hows behind compression really elevated my sound. It fixed a lot of things. It fixed some stereo problems I had. It fixed some balancing problems I had. And it really just kind of changed the game completely. At this point, I like to say that there's one more thing that absolutely kind of changed the game in my mixing abilities and in my quality. And you can absolutely tell in this track how different it sounds because of this one thing, which is number one was compression. Number two, which applies to this track, is reverb. Learning how to use reverb properly absolutely changed the game. Now, why was this so hard for me? Why did it take me so long to really just learn how to use reverb properly and use it a lot more? I want to talk about that real quick because it's actually something very similar with compression that I think we need to talk about. Now, if you're a music producer and you're learning how to mix, the hard part is and if you're an EDM producer and you're learning how to mix, the hard part is you'll find a lot of mixing tutorials by well-established people that give you good advice that might not necessarily apply to electronic music. Electronic music is very, very digital, and there, a lot of the rules that you might follow might not apply here. Let's take compression, for example. In compression, a lot of tutorials tell you, they tell you to be careful with compression, be careful with attack times, be careful with dynamics, don't squish anything. You don't want to over compress things because you still want things to have dynamics, and you want your track to have life. If you over compress things, you take the life out of it. That's very, very common advice for tutorials. And of course it is true. There's one caveat though. This is electronic music. In EDM, things are a lot of times way compressed, like I'm not gonna say over compressed, but heavily compressed, that you can't really listen to that advice. And you need to learn that you can't listen to that advice, because a lot of mixing tutorials are just made for general music out there, music where these things do matter, but this is EDM, right? A lot of the traditional things might not matter. Here we compress everything, we squish everything, make everything thick. It's not uncommon for me to be using reference tracks in my tracks that are mastered all the way down to like -3 LU, like -3 LUFS. I've seen it before. Maybe 3 is an exaggeration, but I've definitely seen 4, -3, -4, -5. There are a lot of tracks that are just so compressed that way, and that's pretty common, right? Loudness is just a thing. Loudness wars are won, and in EDM, things are thick, things are fat, things are compressed, and things are just fat. Dynamics does not matter nearly as much as a lot of tutorials say, or maybe I should say, not overly compressing things is not really as much of a concern in EDM as it might be in other genres. So the hard part is you really have to learn these things and learn that, okay, this is EDM. Compression, sure, I might generally need to be careful with it, but you can get away with compressing things heavily, and you might want to compress things heavily. OTT, thick compressors, Camel Crusher, these are all things in electronic music that are so normal. Now there's another thing that's very, very normal in electronic music that I don't think is talked about a lot in mixing, which is reverb. Reverb kind of tutorials are pretty much the same. They say, hey, this is reverb, be careful. And, it adds space, it adds some nice life to your things. It can muddy stuff up, add it, on things that matter, give things a little bit of space, give things, like a room to be in, and just, add it normally, right? Don't go crazy with it. They don't say don't go crazy with it, but it's kind of implied because it's reverb. It's just really an effect, right? You're just throwing things on there to give it room, to make sure things aren't too dry. And, small rooms, medium rooms, you don't need to use large rooms. You don't need things to be super, super wet, but just throw some reverb on there. But obviously no tutorial is going to tell you to drown things in reverb, because you don't necessarily want to drown things in reverb. But this is electronic music. Drown everything in reverb. That's one of the biggest things about this track, is that I started just drowning things in reverb, and my tracks just started sounding way better. And it's actually funny because if you listen to any of my older tracks, they are just so dry. I don't know how they're so dry, but they just are. And it's crazy how dry my tracks are, and I just started drowning things on reverb, and it made a huge difference. And it's interesting because I actually discovered this on accident. I would still use reverb in the past, but I would just throw a normal amount on it, like a medium amount of reverb on my things. And I was making my trance track, and I just knew something was so off about it. and I downloaded Valhalla Supermassive, which is like a massive delayed reverb effect. And one day I threw Valhalla Supermassive on my leads, and I just realized on my melody, and I just realized it sounded way better. And it was just intuitively just a massive, not intuitively, but it's by design just a massive reverb and space and delay for your sound. And I just realized, wait, I threw this on my leads, and all of a sudden it just sounds a lot closer to the actual tracks I listen to, which is when I realized maybe I just need to start drowning things in reverb. And that's exactly what I did, and it made a huge difference. So the biggest thing you'll listen to, which you definitely heard in the synths and you definitely heard in the leads, is just drowning things in reverb makes a huge difference, and it just makes things sound way better. The other thing is it also solved a lot of my leveling issues, because one of the things I used to have to do in the past is just turn my leads and my synth and whatever way up, because I never quite cut through the mix. But now that I just started drowning things in reverb, and it felt louder, but the levels didn't really change, and it just made things sound way better. So I can definitely say now that A, compression was a big thing that changed my sound, but B, learning how to drown things, not even learning how to drown things, just drowning things in reverb and being so generous with the reverb made a massive difference. Huge sounds. Very, very dry without it, and just so much more full with it. Big difference, big difference. Yeah, you can just tell. And I mean, it made a huge difference. I think that's one of the reasons this track sounds so much better. Not only A, because I was a better producer, because that had been about a year since I touched anything melodic, but B, just learning how to drown things in reverb made it a lot better. And also I think it made the bass cleaner, because I used to struggle with, again, the levels and a lot of other things. But once you just throw a bunch of reverb on there, things kind of figure themselves out. You can mix by ear a lot better without having to rely on visualizers, because, well, there's not as many issues to begin with. So dry, things don't really cut through, it hurts just to listen to. Things get their space, things are a lot more wet, a lot wetter, and it just massive difference. Which brings us to the second drop. Few effects here, a few ambiances, a few tones. Other things here, swells are back, effects, crashes, all that stuff. Hi-hats are there. We come to the end of the second drop, and we come down. We get this nice effect right here that makes things feel really dark. Same thing we got earlier, but when we bring it down, it just adds such a dark tone to the track, which I talked about in the 1 hour challenge. But again, we just the other thing is, again, the track just moves so fast, where you get everything in the build up, 45 seconds, drop a minute and 10 seconds later, the track comes down, we get that immediate dark feel, and just 4 bars later, into the second verse. The Reese is back, we get some dark plucks here, and these effects that I really, really like to use that give the track some life, and again, some edge, some darkness. Mandatory vocal reverse, and strings that are mandatory in every track. The interesting thing about this part is that the strings might make things feel a little bit more emotional, and I still like that emotion. So even though this is meant to be a red track, an impulsive track, A, I just had to include strings, but B, it still has those elements, it still has my sound, and I love strings. Very nice strings too. You play around with the intervals and the chords themselves, and the melody as well, and it's just very, very nice overall. So again, slightly darker area, slightly more emotional area, really nice strings there. The track has some life to it, but it still moves forward pretty quickly. You have these hi-hats here for most of it. Big claps as the ambience goes away, that kind of draws it out a little bit more and gives it some little bit more uniqueness. Super nice tone on the strings there. Into the build-up, claps are still there with the ARP again. Build-up builds up again. Coming into the second drop, where you get this ARP on top of the leads that has the same pluck as this original sample ARP. Now, one thing I do want to call attention to here, because I do think this is important and worth calling attention to, is how we kind of progress the track and make it unique. Even though we have two drops that sound very, very similar to one another, the only difference is a little bit more drums that I actually still really like. Let's solo these real quick. Again, slightly more full. Clap is actually there. A little bit more full on the first drop. So again, really nice uniqueness here. Mandatory. Crash goes in. Nice hi-hats. And we drop the drums a little bit at the end. But the point is the drop mostly sounds the same with the ARP. So how do we include kind of the progression into the track and the kind of that storytelling that gives the second drop some uniqueness? One of the things about the first drop, or the first verse, I should say, is that the ARP is pretty much there the entire time. Right, so the ARP is there since the beginning and it doesn't go away. In the build-up, the synths come in and the attention is actually drawn towards the synths. So even though right here you have a lot of things going on, the ARP is kind of doing most of the movement here. Once you get to the actual build-up, the synths come in. And because they're filtered, that attention is drawn towards the synths and the chords. Then you throw the leads in and then the attention is really, really drawn to the synths and the leads. And that puts your emphasis on those elements so that when the drop hits, your attention and the emphasis is on those elements, on the synths and the leads. We do the opposite in the second verse where the ARP is not there at all, right? It's just, you know, the basses, the strings. We're kind of in the ambience of the track here. We're immersed in the track and it's really, really nice. The collapse come in, feels very, very, a little bit cinematic almost, very large. And in the build-up, the synths are there, but the ARP actually comes back in. So we didn't have the ARP earlier at all in the second verse. Shouldn't have done that. We didn't have the ARP earlier at all in the second verse, and it comes back in the build-up, which in this case actually brings the attention a little bit more to the ARP here because it wasn't there and now it is, and our attention is on there in the build-up. The synths are there, but the leads aren't really there. So what happens is over here in the first verse, since the ARP was there the entire time and we introduced the synths and the melody in the build-up, in the drop the attention is on the synths and the melody and the leads. In the second verse, the ARP is not there at all until it comes in the build-up, and then the attention goes into the ARP going into the drop, which means that when we actually get the drop, you feel the ARP a little bit more and it gives it a little bit more character and it feels unique to the first drop. Attention's on the ARP, and we get these plucks right here that recreate them, that again make the second drop feel distinct to the first. Synths are still there, leads are still there, reverb is definitely still there, drums are there. We bring the drops down a little bit to make it feel like you're coming down right here into the outro of the track, which goes dark again, which I really like. Recent plucks are there. String come back, albeit slightly different. Nice emotion there. Recent plucks still setting the ambience. Nice tone on the strings. And that is Atomos. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest thing I want to highlight, because again, although there's not a lot of narrational intention, there's always still productional intention in these tracks. You know, the storytelling about starting with, you know, just the ARP, drums come up, comes down, build up comes up with the leads, up into the drop, and then we bring it back down, but we change the mood, we change the ambience to something a little bit darker, and we really play around with that just to have kind of the ARP come back in the build up into the ARPs over here, which we just do our best to recreate. Doesn't sound too accurate when soloed, but in the context of the track, it's pretty close. Pretty close. It does the job in the context of the track. And again, big leads, and overall, after the drop finishes, we are 2 minutes and 33 seconds in, which is crazy. But again, we bring it back down, we change kind of the mood, we bring it back to that dark self, and then we just bring the strings in. Very nice fluid strings, giving you the outro of the track. Of course, some reverses. Also, really like that string tone, call back to the earlier string section. There you go. And that is Atomos. All right, and there it is. About 15 minutes on OBS, so probably recording a little bit longer. I actually don't know if this is longer or shorter than the first take I took. It might actually be longer. I feel like the other one was quicker. Also, my camera was dying, so I was running out of time near the end. But there you go. There's Atomos. Biggest things again is just the speed of this track, just how different it is from my discography, but also how fundamental it is to my sound. You know, the 150 BPM, melodic bass, melodic dubstep in this case. Huge reverb sounds that made things a lot better. And there's just a little bit more life to this track overall. I don't really hold this track as close to my heart because I wanted this to be this is the impulsive track. This is the red track, I like to call it. That's just me putting things out there. There's still intention to it. I still like the sounds I chose, and it's still me at the end of the day. But I definitely don't consider it to be my most artistic work. And I love making sure my tracks feel artistic. I want them to be pieces of art, not just music. My next track is definitely that way. The one after that I'm working on is also coming pretty close to being a little bit more artistic, albeit a little bit more musical, we'll say. But that's Atomos, the track that got me out of my rut. That's just kind of bringing me back to who I was. It's bringing me back to that creative self that I really missed, honestly, because especially since the start of the year, since A, my schedule was so rigid of, okay, I need to upload these tracks in this order, and B, none of them were all that creative or artistic, and C, a lot of them were tracks that were almost already finished. I just really wasn't my creative self, making tracks and making music and putting, some expression into my tracks in a long time, which is what I'm doing again. And especially after this track and especially everything that happened over the summer, I'm starting to realize that I like the fact that I overthink things and I overcomplicate things and I want things to be more intricate and artistic. And at the end of the day, not only do I think that's going to be my edge, but I want it to be my edge, and I kind of need it to be. There's so many people out there that are making tracks that are like this, that are a little bit more impulsive. But, I think someone needs to be out there making the art. I want to be out there making the art. I don't want to be in the business of making music. I want to be in the business of making art. And that's why I like this track for snapping me out of it, or snapping me back into it, I should say. And that's why we have a lot of nice, exciting things coming forward. Next track out mid-December, I think like December 19th or something, whatever the Friday is. Already looking at a January release. My March release is already an idea, and we're going to go from there. But again, that is where we are. That is Atomos, and that is the track breakdown. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Let me know what you guys thought of the track. Let me know if you guys picked up on those characteristics. Let me know if you picked up on the speed. Let me know if it sounds very, very different than my sound. If you picked up on that, let me know if you picked up on the artwork and you thought this is very unique, right? It's red. It's completely red artwork, which I generally avoid because I always kind of intrinsically had this idea of, blue being that cooler, calmer, and a little bit more complex color, while red is, kind of, you go for things and you're impulsive and you're ambitious and you just kind of take what you can. So again, I never really touched red in my artwork until now. Let me know if you guys picked up on that. Let me know what you think about the track. Let me know if you think the reverb made the track sound different, or if you even noticed the difference, or if you didn't notice the difference. Let me know any other thoughts you guys may have on the track. Don't forget to let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Remember, I want this channel to be a place of discussion, so leave anything you have down below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.